Hello, this is Dr. B. I appreciate you stopping by. We thought it might be helpful if we provide an audio series based on the book Speak Softly, Love Loudly, Uncommon Sense for Raising Healthy and Successful Kids. So, stand by. Let's get to it.
Chapter 3. Because I Said So. Discipline. Parents, a peculiar group who first try to get their children to walk and talk, and then try to get them to sit down and shut up. Wagster's Dictionary of Humor and Wit. Why am I so tired? I'm tired of being tired. For a couple of years I've been blaming it on iron-poor blood, the need of vitamins, poor diet, and a dozen other problems. However, now I finally found the real reason. I'm tired because I'm overworked. The people in the United States number 299 million, and 166 million are retired. That leaves 133 million people to do all the work. There are 85 million in school, which leaves 48 million to do the work. Of this number, there are 29 million employed by the federal government. This leaves 19 million to do the work. 4 million are in the armed forces, which leaves 15 million to do the work. Take from that total the 14,800,000 people who work for state and city government, and that leaves 200,000 to do all the work. There are 188,000 in hospitals, so that leaves 12,000 to do work. Now there are 11,998 people in prisons. That leaves just 2 people to do all the work, you and me, and you're sitting there reading this. Parenting can be exhausting. The responsibility is tiring, and nowhere more so than correcting a child's attitudes and behavior. This chapter may have been entitled The Joy of Parenting, but it would have been a feeble attempt at humor. Upon reflection, it was realized that it would be in bad taste. Disciplining children is not one of the more enjoyable aspects of parenting. Being a good parent requires providing discipline, but anyone who actually enjoys it has a problem. Disciplining children is not for cowards and requires a tremendous amount of dedication, insight, wisdom, and persistence. Providing discipline in a healthy, constructive manner begins with distinguishing between punishment and discipline. We have all heard the line, "Spare the rod and spoil the child," but what exactly does that mean? What is the purpose of the rod? Is the rod used to strike out at the child's misbehavior, or is it an instrument to lash out at the child? Are we to believe that the intention of the rod is to hurt those that it is used upon? Is the rod an instrument to encourage or discourage? If so, encourage or discourage what? Our motivation when we discipline, as well as our attitude, will have a tremendous impact on how effective the correction is. Furthermore, our approaches to discipline will have a powerful effect on our relationships with our children. Differences between discipline and punishment. There is a significant difference between approaching a child to punish and approaching a child to discipline. In the end, the same consequences may be used, but the approach and attitude will produce different results. Before disciplining a child, the questions that need to be asked are, why am I doing this? Is the purpose simply to hurt, to vent and lash out, or is it to discourage or encourage? What am I attempting to teach? I will be teaching something. Punishment involves hurting another person with the intent to cause pain. The person who is inflicting punishment is intent on creating injury, often for injury's sake. They focus on extracting payment for an offense. Anger or revenge is the motivator. What a child learns from this approach is that it's okay to act out in anger. Children also learn to hide their feelings out of fear of more punishment. But the hiding of feelings never changes their attitudes or their sense of values. Through punishment, a child learns the scary side of parents. They become frightened and feel unloved. Discipline, on the other hand, comes from a very different motive. Punishment changes relationships for the worse. Discipline changes children for the better. Discipline is driven by the motivation to teach and help. It is prompted out of love rather than anger. While part of the purpose of discipline is to create temporary discomfort, the ultimate aim is positive change. Discipline's primary goal is not to harm. What a child needs to learn is that certain behaviors are unacceptable and inappropriate, while others are commendable and to be valued. However, regardless of whether or not a child's behavior calls for correction or praise, they should leave any situation with the sense of still being loved and not feeling they are a bad person. A distinction between the acceptance of the child and the rejection of unacceptable behavior needs to take place in the mind of a parent. Inappropriate behavior needs to be rejected, but not the child. Hate the sin, but love the sinner. Discipline initially takes more time and effort to accomplish than does punishment. This inconvenience is due to the demand for a disciplining parent to be self-aware, self-controlled, and thoughtful in their approach to correcting their child. Before children can be appropriately disciplined, parents must be disciplined themselves. The good news is that discipline yields a much higher return than either punishment or permissiveness. This self-control and calculation on the part of a parent shows that the parent is in control and safety is still being maintained. This approach also teaches that there are behaviors which are unacceptable, and a child should avoid them in the future. Therefore, discipline reduces the possibility of similar misbehavior recurring. Without positive discipline, the same problems are more likely to crop up in the future. They will have to be dealt with time and time again. Practicing punishment usually results in a child becoming fearful or sneaky. Providing discipline teaches what is right to do, rather than just learning to cover up wrong. Pay now with time, energy, and effort, or pay later. If we wait and pay later, we pay a much higher price, and so do our children, because we will both be dealing with additional complications. In the future, the price becomes higher because the stakes are higher. Investment now in appropriate correction of our children will pay huge dividends in the future. We must invest ourselves in disciplining our children now, because moral behavior does not happen automatically later. Morality. Some years ago, Kohlberg, a developmental theorist, conceived of a theory of moral development. He perceived and believed people change morally as they grow older. Over the stretch of time, he saw healthy growth developing as an increasing level of personal morality and sense of responsibility. However, this change in maturity was gradual. A light bulb does not suddenly turn on in the minds of children at the ages of 5, 8, or 13 to reveal morality. They don't automatically see the right in doing good for good's sake. Our children operate from the standpoint of self-centeredness. A child tends to want what they want, when they want it, not to mention how they want it. This truth is seen early in life. My ball, give me, mine, and no are frequent utterances. Our children don't become equipped at birth with a clear sense of right and wrong, nor do they automatically feel for others. Morality doesn't come naturally or quickly, so it must be taught. A child begins their moral development by trying to avoid what is inconvenient or painful. Children respond early on to what is pleasant and what is distasteful. They want to avoid what is uncomfortable and want to grab a hold of what is attractive. This is one of the reasons that correction is needed. What is often desired is not good for them. Correction also represents how a parent can take away what a child wants. In this way, selfishness can be used to advantage when disciplining. Discipline teaches the right moral lessons, which will eventually be incorporated into a child's moral fiber. As they grow older, they do more of what is right in order to please the parent and avoid consequences. Parents' values are gradually adopted, and children change from simply avoiding negative consequences to being like mom and dad. Gradually, the parents' views of life and morality are accepted, but not fully believed. The commitment shows on the surface, but doesn't have deep roots. However, as a child gets older, they begin to develop their own view of morality and sense of right and wrong. It is hoped that these roots will be deep and strong by the time they are in their teen years, or at least by early adulthood. Strong values take time to grow and are difficult to instill later in life. Young people begin to see that doing what is right has value in and of itself. No longer is moral-looking behavior done simply to please others or to just avoid consequences. This is a change from being motivated to avoid pain and punishment, or just doing what mom and dad have done, to having moral standards of their own. This process is something to keep in mind as we raise our children and as we discipline them. Children are not naturally going to be moral. Morality needs to be taught. Lessons of what is right and wrong must be learned. Some time ago, Parade magazine carried an article by Marilyn Vos Savant. In her column, Ask Marilyn, Marilyn was asked the question, "Why do you have to teach a child to be good? Why does being bad seem to come to them almost instinctively?" Marilyn Vos Savant replied, "When you are teaching a child to be good, you are actually teaching him how to be civilized, that is, to live in an increasingly complex community with others. Being bad, which generally means being selfish, includes everything from inconsiderate behavior to stealing. Probably is instinctive. That is, it has survival value for the individual, but at the expense of the others. So teaching a child to be good is more than a nicety, it's a necessity." Keeping in mind the natural tendency for our children to misbehave, we should expect periods of rule-breaking as well as selfishness. But expecting them does not mean that we should tolerate these violations. Our approach and attitude towards children when they break the rules conveys powerful messages. A healthy approach sends messages that show our love and acceptance, but also teach what is right and what is wrong. A child can receive considerable discipline if they know that they are loved. A loving parent is a potent teacher. Without a loving attitude, rebellion and resentment will be bred. We should keep in mind that rules without relationships result in rebellion. When we give consequences to children, this conveys that we love them enough and we care about them enough to take the time and energy to discipline them. But correction must be delivered without malice, otherwise children don't see the caring. Disciplining children also sends the message that the behavior they are exhibiting is not worth the price they are going to pay. They need to make better choices. Therefore, it is better to do the right thing and avoid the consequences. Whether significant moral character has developed or not, this logic holds. The truth remains that choices have consequences. This fact applies to families, but is also the way the world operates. There are consequences for behavior, whether it is a speeding ticket for driving too fast, or a friend avoiding a friend because they were rude. Keep in mind that the younger our children are when we begin to instill in them the right values and distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate behavior, the less problems we will both have in the future. The earlier we begin with a positive attitude towards discipline, the easier life will be later. The bonus is that there will be less need for discipline in the future. Lessons learned allow for growth in other areas of life, while lessons unlearned are doomed to be repeated. So, let's take a longer look at preparing for discipline. Sailing the 7 Seas. Before jumping into the cold waters of what to do when our children require discipline, we need to consider what we as parents are doing, or for that matter, not doing. Parenting is not always smooth sailing. To be an effective parent, we need to learn to sail the 7 Seas. 7 Seas refers to how parents should work together in the best interest of their children. Parents acting like grown-ups set the stage for effective action when it's needed. While there may be some need for adjustment if there has been a divorce, these general principles still apply. 1. Collaboration. There is no substitute for mother and father working together. There is strength in numbers, and when mom and dad are united in their approach to raising a child, it is very difficult for a child to resist. This fact is even more important when disciplining them. However, the opposite is also true. If the child sees mom and dad divided by anger, disagreement, or undermining each other, they will use the opportunity to manipulate. Remember, a child wants to get their way. The problem is that their way is often the wrong way. A parent who is overly focused on having power or control over the other parent loses sight of their child's needs. Gradually, they lose control of raising their child. In extreme situations, children can even learn to pit mother and father against one another with dire consequences. This can happen in an intact family or with divorced parents. Believe it or not, a mother and father can still choose to work together for their child's best interests, even if they are no longer married. However, this takes the strength to set aside petty squabbling, past hurts, and the need for control or revenge. Too many divorced parents opt to just keep blaming the other parent for current and past problems. They continue to play their feelings out in front of their child. Parents need not be contradicting each other when it comes to raising their child. Conflicts, when they occur, should be away from children. If there are differences of opinion, parents need to speak privately. Sometimes grown-ups should act like grown-ups. If opinions differ in the same household, then parents need to go into another room or excuse their children so they can have their privacy. In the situation of divorce, parents speaking over the phone without the child around is acceptable. So hash out the matter, reach an agreement, create a united front, and then approach your child. Talking over issues and deciding how to raise children is of tremendous importance. Collaboration creates more control and less chaos. Parents need to spend more time talking and working together. The stakes are too high not to. Now, on to the second C, consistency. Number 2, consistency. Parents need to be on the same page, having the same expectations for their children. However, not only should parents be consistent with each other, individually, they need to be consistent from day to day. This consistency includes rules, regulations, values, and discipline. Life for children should be predictable and stable. Without consistency, life becomes stressful and confusing for a child. They feel the need to test boundaries to be sure that everything is okay. The need to know that the walls of safety are intact is a strong one. Inconsistency opens the door for children to challenge their parents and defy the rules. In order to maintain consistency, parents must take the time to think about what they are doing. Give the same responses even when it is inconvenient, and not allow emotion to dictate how they relate to their children. Combining this consistency with caring puts parents in the position of maximum influence. 3. Caring. There is no substitute for a child feeling loved by both their mother and father. This is a fundamental need of every child. Without it, there is no end to the negative possibilities. A child can take a lot of bumps and bruises from the world if they know that they have a warm home to come back to and have supportive parents. Children need love, and if they don't find it in their homes, they'll look for it elsewhere. The world holds too many horrible situations that masquerade as love and acceptance. Later, the truth of how they violate young people becomes too clear. As parents, we must not allow this kind of power to be filtered through the sick minds and shaky hands of others. We need to exercise positive influence by caring and making matters clear. 4. Clarity. Not only should the parents be on the same page about their expectations and rules, but they should make those rules very clear to their children. This clarity is not necessary only for kids, but for each other as well. There are a few things that are more frustrating for a child than getting disciplined or perhaps punished when they didn't realize they had violated any rule. If they didn't know what the rule was, how can consequences be fair? This situation becomes a setup for losing respect for a parent and harboring anger. Being unfair conveys disrespect and a lack of commitment to another person. Children will become resentful and challenging when they feel they have been treated unfairly. Changing the rules is another no-no. Sometimes this occurs out of forgetfulness, confusion, or playing head games. In any case, it is not just, and children will see it as such. When the time comes to make changes to rules, these changes should be spelled out clearly along with the reasoning. This form of sensitivity shows a child your level of commitment to them and the other parent. This brings us to the 5th C. 5. Commitment. Parents need to be committed to each other and to their children. Commitment must be conveyed through time, energy, and effort. The primary commitment should be to sensitivity and looking out for others. Even after a divorce, there should be a commitment to work with the other parent for the child's well-being. Too often, the opposite of this cooperation is true. There is too much commitment to selfishness and injuring the other parent. A child's needs become lost. Whether a family is intact or broken, children can become a battleground. A child can be caught in the middle and used as a pawn to strike out at the other parent. This is one of the easiest ways to hurt and confuse our children. A child typically remains committed and loyal to both parents. It is unfair to put them in a position where they must choose one over the other. Children should not have to endure feeling the pain of one parent striking out at the other. A child cannot remain neutral in this parental battle. Commitment keeps us focused on what is truly important, our relationships. Parents should show their commitment through their concern. 6. Concern. The expression of concern is shown through both the words we speak and the actions that we take. Our children pay a lot of attention to whether or not we notice things and whether we care enough to take action when needed. This fact is seen early in life, with children begging us, "Watch me, watch me." Parents' concern should cover everything in their children's lives. Parents need to be concerned about schoolwork, respectfulness, who children's friends are, and everything in between. A concerned parent puts themselves in a position not only to notice what's happening with their child, but also to intervene when they need help. An unconcerned parent doesn't notice the pack of matches on the coffee table and ends up taking action after the house is already on fire. Concern added to the 7th C allows for potential fires to be snuffed out before they get started. 7. Confidence. Children need to respect their parents. The 7 C's provide mothers and fathers with the means to gain a child's respect. Confidence magnifies all the other C's. It projects a healthy sense of control and ability to carry matters through. Parents need to project a sense of confidence, not arrogance or inadequacy, towards their children. They need to realize who is the adult and who is in charge. A parent has much more life experience and hopefully wisdom than their child. They have learned from their mistakes and don't want their children to repeat them. Mothers and fathers need to exert their authority in a positive, straightforward, confident manner. Kids need to know where the boundaries are. This gives them a sense of security, safety, and well-being. Confidence helps meet these needs. A confident parent comes across as meaning what they say and being committed to seeing things through. This parent is hard to resist and less likely to be challenged. Children want parents to take charge in spite of the fact that they question and test them. A confident, fair parent is going to raise a confident and fair-minded child. By being sure of yourself and adhering to the other rules for sailing the 7 C's, a child feels safe and security lends itself to healthy growth. Now that we've sailed the 7 C's, let's take an even closer look at preparing for discipline. The attitude. Parents need to have an attitude, a good one. The first step in disciplining our children is to manage our own thoughts and feelings. These are the feelings that determine attitudes. Before we take steps to correct our children, we should ask ourselves some questions. Why am I about to do what I'm thinking of doing? Is what I am going to do based on my own anger and frustration? Is it merely about me letting off steam? Am I simply repeating how mother or father handled things with me? Or am I simply doing what I have always done in similar situations in the past? Reasons for disciplining children need to be based on valid attitudes. Without healthy motivation and attitudes, a parent is more likely punishing or just acting out of habit. A positive attitude is motivated by the desire to teach our children what is appropriate and needed. The motivation needs to be one of helping the child to behave in a healthy fashion. Healthy behavior results in emotionally healthy children. However, we should not expect that children will be happy about being disciplined. We are likely to see the opposite. If you want to do a check on your attitude before disciplining, simply look at your face in the mirror. What do you see? A directed, loving parent, or an angry, out-of-control monster? Early intervention. When is the best time to put out a fire? The best time is when it first starts, of course. Don't give it time to be fueled and become inflamed. A cold bucket of water is all that is needed to douse it when it starts. Waiting requires the fire trucks and a lot more help. Delay also results in much greater damage being done. It only takes a small spark to set ablaze an entire forest. So it is with misbehavior and the absence of discipline. Rather than allowing things to get out of hand and escalate to bigger and badder situations, we need to step in early. For some parents, this means paying closer attention to what their children are doing. Other parents need to notice how they are feeling and the way their tension is mounting while observing their children. Emotions and frustrations must not be allowed to build while watching children misbehave. When a parent begins to notice their own tension rising, they need to act. Holding on to the hope that children will just stop misbehaving, or that if we explain to them that what they are doing is wrong, they will cease, is naive. Hoping that our repeated instructions for them to stop doing something will result in them doing the right thing, or thinking that if we give them just one more chance, they will stop their bad behavior, usually ends in a blaze of parental frustration. A bad situation just gets worse. We need to keep in mind that a child's behavior is not simply a matter of good conscience, but it is a matter of their will and what they want. Most children's consciences are not enough to make them change. Selfishness and insensitivity to others' feelings is too strong early in life. Bad behavior must be corrected with the threat and delivery of consequences. Children will respond to what inconveniences them and what makes them feel uncomfortable. A moral compass doesn't direct their behavior, at least not yet. This fact should guide a parent's expectations. Expectations. A parent's expectations for their child prior to giving discipline are incredibly important. The key is to have neither too high nor too low expectations. If we hold to expectations that are unrealistic, then the result will be frustration. This frustration will then guide our actions. These unmet expectations can result in lashing out, or saying things that we later wish we hadn't said. On the other hand, parents can be left feeling defeated and then feel like giving up. Realistically, we shouldn't expect to be able to reason with children about what is right and wrong. By all means, tell them again and again, but back it up with a cost for bad choices. This need is especially true with little children and teenagers. Tell them again anyway, but don't expect that they are going to get it. This is not how their minds operate. Over time, some of the message will sink in. The unpleasantness of consequences must teach the lesson. Growth and maturity will eventually correct this problem. That is, if the right lessons have been learned. Consequences in positive parenting, along with good parental modeling, must teach right from wrong over time. Morality is not a lesson quickly learned. Principles of misbehavior show up in our children even as babies. At the ages of 2 or 3, we usually begin to see them taking things and lying. The realities of life are just beginning. Lessons for parenting are just starting. Parents early on see that their standards will be tested. Children want to know if we mean what we say. They are also searching for boundaries and clear expectations, which help them feel secure and safe. We need to reinforce the fact that we, the parents, are in charge. Children want parents to be strong. This fact gets confusing as children get older due to repeated testing of rules. See this testing as part of a child's normal maturing, especially during the adolescent years. Teens need to stretch their wings in order to help them to eventually become independent. However, during the teen years, even normal challenging doesn't mean that parents should give in to unreasonable demands or selfishness on the part of their child, but rather, give them the degree of independence that corresponds with their ability to be responsible. Expect children to act their ages and do what they developmentally should do. This involves recognizing a child's developmental level and that certain behaviors and levels of responsibility can be expected at different ages. Parents should not set expectations for children's behavior that do not match their ages and abilities. Otherwise, both parents and children will experience hurt and frustration. A jockey isn't going to play professional basketball. A small child isn't going to be able to explain why they did something. Make parenting and expectations age-appropriate. For example, we can explain to a teenager the reasons we take certain steps for their safety, and we can do so in detail. There are evil people in the world that would harm them and could do horrible things. To take the same approach with a 5-year-old would only inflame their fear. A young child might become more than cautious. They might become so anxious to protect themselves that they begin to stay away from situations that are safe due to fear of being harmed. Nightmares might surface. The possibility of doing more harm than good is very possible. For a young child, a general warning of danger is a better approach. Another age-relevant area is household chores. Age and chores need to be kept in perspective. 10-year-olds can be expected to clean up after themselves, help with the dishes, and clean the table after dinner. A 4-year-old has difficulty even holding a regular-sized glass without it escaping their grip. A young child doesn't have the attention span to focus long enough to give much help. An older child can and should be expected to do so. Matching expectations to a child's developmental level avoids a lot of headaches for both children and their parents. Looking at these developmentally related examples also raises the question of how to deal with violations of rules versus accidents. They are not equal offenses. A 3-year-old who spills a glass of milk should be expected to spill a glass of milk. In fact, sometimes the fault is with the parent for giving the child a glass too large to handle. The consequences should be none or very minimal under these circumstances. A teenager who takes the car without permission is deliberately breaking the rules and knows it. The consequence should be much more severe. Loss of car privileges for a reasonable period of time would be a logical consequence. In general, accidents could be dealt with as just that, inconvenient mistakes. A good rule of thumb is for a child to clean up their mistake, or at least help. Even an accident can have some consequences, but no further payment is usually necessary. On the other hand, a deliberate violation of boundaries and rules represents a conscious choice, and the consequences should be more substantial. Spilling milk after being told not to carry it in one hand is not an accident, it is disobedience. Cleaning up the mess may be part of the consequences, but more needs to be done as well in order to motivate cooperation in the future. Helping clean the rest of the room where the mishap occurred could be an added consequence. Keeping in mind ages and abilities of children helps to develop realistic expectations. Once a rule is broken, the approach for leveling discipline needs to be matter-of-fact. Matter-of-fact. What is the best way to deliver consequences when the time comes that they are needed? Do we lecture? Are we extremely emotional? Do we vent our hostility and frustration? Or are we calmly providing the discipline in a matter-of-fact manner? Calmly and matter-of-factly giving discipline lessens the chances of provoking our children, frustrating them, causing confusion, and having the situation escalate further. Poor delivery of discipline can lead to hurt or more disobedience. When a worker is called into a supervisor's office for being late, it would be ridiculous for the supervisor to shout, scream, and throw a hissy fit. A good supervisor would take the approach of being straightforward, laying the problem out, and then specifying the consequences. They might also point out what will happen if the problem continues. We can learn a lot from this strategy. However, as parents, it is much more difficult to be unemotional, especially when it comes to disciplining our own children, but it is necessary. The matter-of-fact approach gives us credibility with our children and reminds them of who is in charge. It is less provoking and not likely to get out of control. Children can more easily see the problem and bear the consequences when they are not bathed in emotion. This approach allows parents to maintain a sense of control and holds them back from doing something that they might regret later. A watchdog with ears laid back, poised, emitting a slow, steady growl, is much more imposing than a hound yelping, frantically chasing its own tail. Power under control is what a disciplined parent needs to exercise. On the whole, there is less chance of injuring our children and more chance of healing them, building them up, and sending them in the right direction by being matter-of-fact. Which, of course, is the purpose of discipline. Showing self-control and minimizing our expression of emotion strengthens the effects of discipline. This approach sends the right messages. In the end, it should decrease the prospect of feeling guilty, resenting our children, or them resenting us. Resentment comes too easily when not recognizing our motivation or theirs. A child's motivation. Inappropriate behavior exhibited by a child is generally born out of selfishness, the need to avoid inconvenience, get revenge or receive attention, a desire for control, or ignorance of what's appropriate. With respect to receiving consequences, our focus needs to be on a child's motivation to control and also to avoid inconvenience. Consequences involve a parent taking charge and creating temporary inconveniences for the child. The misbehavior that brought about the need for consequences may have come from different motivations. However, Whatever the child's motivation, the important point is that when delivering consequences, do not allow your child to engage you in discussion. Let's go over that again. Do not allow your child to engage you in discussion. Once a rule has been clearly broken, it is broken. No amount of dialogue by a child is going to change that. They can only distract, confuse, or frustrate a parent by justifying their behavior or denying it. It is a time for a response on the part of the parent, not excuses from the lips of the child. If our children can engage us and reason with us, they control the situation and possibly avoid, or at least delay, their consequences. Sometimes they will wear us down or frustrate us to such an extent that we give up and they get away with their behavior. At other times, the situation gets so confusing that we're not sure what to do. Parents can also become so angry they end up doing or saying something inappropriate that later is regretted. The offense needs to be pointed out by the parent when giving consequences. However, the time to fully discuss the violation is after the consequence has been paid. Afterwards, a discussion about what happened, what could have been done differently, and what needs to be done in the future can take place. Waiting to talk about the matter after the price is paid takes away much of the child's motivation to manipulate and avoid the consequences. Attempting to reason with or explain why behaviors are appropriate or inappropriate prior to giving consequences doesn't get very far. Trying to discuss their cost to our children prior to the consequence only feeds into that desire to avoid inconvenience and have control. How to manipulate parents is not a lesson children need to learn. Falling into this trap of premature discussion does no good. Parents need to teach that choices have consequences. Choices have consequences. One of the hallmark laws of physics is that for every action there is an opposite and equal reaction. A pebble cannot be thrown into a pool of water without sending out ripples that reach far beyond that little stone. One thing affects another. In the same way, when a child acts, they not only affect themselves but others as well. Many consequences for choices in life are natural, occurring because of the natural flow of the world. However, consequences can also be logical. A parent can logically tie consequences to an offense with positive results. Natural consequences. Natural consequences include the natural and predictable results of an action. Jump off the roof, and the natural consequence could be to break a leg. A hand placed on a hot stove will return burned and aching. Natural consequences can also come in the form of social costs. People who are rude or use other people usually end up being shunned or avoided. The social cost can be high. Children who always want to control how they and their friends play will find their friends no longer coming to visit or inviting them to birthday parties. Critical people often find they need to locate new folks to criticize because the old ones aren't sticking around. When it comes to children and natural consequences, often the natural consequence is enough. No further discipline by a parent needs to be added. A child who reaches up and burns themselves on the stove does not need more correction to learn not to touch hot stoves. The lesson is usually well learned. A controlling child who has been losing friends may not need more consequences, but it's helpful to point out how their behavior is causing their lost friendships. These consequences happen in the natural order of things. However, while parents should permit some natural consequences, others they cannot. While natural consequences normally occur, logical consequences don't just happen. They must be made to happen. Logical consequences. Logical consequences occur by seeing the logical flow from the offense to the cost that needs to be attached. The violation is used to prescribe the price to be paid. The use of logical consequences is a highly effective form of discipline. It helps to get across the point that the misbehavior created the cost. The offense and the payment are closely linked. Logical consequences make it easier to teach personal responsibility. Children connect their choices to consequences with logic. For example, a child throws the TV remote on the floor. The logical consequence would be to lose television viewing privileges for a time. Another child stays up past their bedtime. The logical consequence would be to go to bed earlier the next night. A teenager takes the car without permission, so they lose the use of the car for a while. Writings on the wall result in the child being required to clean or repaint the wall. If they are very young, they must help. Messes are made, therefore they must clean them up. A child rides their bike in a dangerous area. They lose their bike for the time being. They come late to dinner, so they miss dessert. A child wets or soils himself because of refusing to stop playing and use the bathroom. The logical consequence is for them to wash out their dirty underwear. Toys, baseball gloves, or rollerblades are left lying about. These items get taken up until they can be earned back. Mornings result in a child repeatedly being late, getting up, and dressing for school. So they are taken to school in their pajamas, bringing regular clothes in a bag. Logical consequences require parents to ask themselves, What consequence for this offense would make sense? There is no end to the possibilities using logical consequences. Natural consequences, however, should have limitations. While it is acceptable to allow some natural consequences to occur, other consequences are just too dangerous. We should never allow a child to play where they could be run over by a car or abducted by a predator. Yes, those could be considered natural consequences, but unacceptable ones. Consequences are meant to help, not to hurt, to teach, but not damage. Keeping the need for consequences in mind, we move to the next part of our story. The complicated nature of parenting demands a battle plan for discipline.